Let's set up for the details now. President Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo is asking Supreme Court judges to possess a sound knowledge of the law and set precedents in the application of it. According to him, the Supreme Court is not bound to follow decisions of any other courts, and therefore Supreme Court judges must apply the law as expected in order to command the respect of the people. He noted that the perspective of the Supreme Court judges is critical for our national development, especially at these challenging times. President Akufo-Addo said these when he sworn in two Supreme Court judges, Justice Barbara Francis Akayensu and Justice Samuel Kwame Adibu Asiedu at the Jubilee House. He also urged the judges to help make rule of law not just a slogan, but reality.
Justices, more so justices of the Supreme Court, must be learned, know their case law, and ensure their decisions and judgments are properly motivated. It is in this manner that judges contribute to the orderly development of the nation. So to our new Supreme Court judges, it is extremely important for you to bear in mind that the growth of our nation demands that we have a judiciary that commands the respect of the people by the quality of its delivery of justice, as well as by the comportment of its judges. Applications of the laws of the land must occur in the words of the judicial oath that you have just taken, without fear or favor, affection or ill will, and therefore without recourse to the political, religious, or ethnic affiliations of any citizen of the land, of any person before you. When a person falls foul of the law, society demands that the person will be dealt with accordingly, and law enforcement agencies, including the Supreme Court, must ensure that this is done. That is the true meaning of the concept of equality before the law, and I'm confident that you will uphold it and distinguish yourselves in the work of the court. All of us, from the executive, legislature, judiciary, public sector, security agencies, private sector, political parties, civil society, professional and trade associations, religious bodies, traditional authorities, and ordinary citizens have a collective responsibility to work together with our different views and our different perspectives for the Ghana project, a united Ghana driven by considerations of social justice and solidarity.
Justice Barbara Francis Akayensu, on behalf of her colleague, thanked President Akufo-Addo and pledged to do justice to all manner of people is expected of them.
It is both a privilege and a humbling opportunity to be nominated among many other qualified persons and approved to serve on the highest court of our land. The enormity of the task ahead is not lost on us. That is the more reason why we give God all the glory and thanks for this recognition. My colleague and I are grateful to the President, the Council of State, Parliament, the Judicial Council, His Lordship, the Chief Justice, and the Bar Association for the trust reposed in us. We cannot forget our families and friends who have remained our anchor of strength and support to date. Finally, while we give thanks to the people of Ghana, on whose behalf we have been called upon to administer justice, we assure the people that we shall keep faith and keep the fidelity to the Constitution and shall remain committed to our judicial oaths, God being our helper.
A non-governmental organization, Send Ghana, is calling on government to establish a public health emergency fund to deal with disease outbreak in the country. Government, in its 2022 to 2025 National Medium-Term Development Framework, promised to establish a public health fund to help increase Ghana's preparedness in fighting disease outbreaks. Send Ghana is urging government to show some commitment to establishing the fund, especially in the recent Marburg, monkeypox and COVID-19 diseases.
You agree with me that since 2020, when we had COVID up to now, it really has lent us something that we need to look at. Clearly, one has to do it. We were not prepared for it, and it's because we didn't have the needed funds for that matter. But I believe that government was able to mobilize resources for us to be able to stem the tide. What we are calling for is that we wouldn't want another situation where another pandemic hit us and government then have to run helter-skelter to get money to fund the pandemic. It might interest you to know that Ghana has what's called the National Action Plan for Health Security, which has been costed. And so all the intervention with cost estimate, but then when COVID hit, we didn't have the means to fund it. And that is why we think that, fast forward 2022, we are now going to 2023. We heard about Marburg, we heard about monkeypox, and before then we had influenza and the like also hitting us. So what we are thinking is that if you have an established fund, like the way we have Get Fund, that is really supporting education infrastructure. If we have a dedicated fund solely for epidemics, solely for public health emergencies, we think that that is going to help. And indeed, if you look at when the government proposed the COVID-19 Trust Fund, you realize that Ghanaians willingly contributed to the fund. That shows us how altruistic Ghanaians are. And for that matter, they are always willing to contribute to a cause. So what we are calling for is for government to kind of change the COVID Trust Fund into an emergency preparedness fund, because the name says COVID Trust Fund. That tells you that it's basically solely for COVID. So we are saying that we have the trust fund that is established by Act of Parliament already. Why don't you convert that into the public health emergency fund? So if you have any future emergency or pandemics, then that can be used for that purpose.
Right.
Another thing that we are looking at, because the question is, where do we then get the money to actually operationalize such a fund? One key source is that, we also have what's called the COVID-19 Health Levy, which enjoins every VAT payment, 1% of VAT payment goes into that levy. It might interest you to know that in 2021, we roped in almost 889 million. 2022, this year, the budget that was read, it's about 1.141 billion. And then in 2023, we are projected to get around 2.5. So this is money that is going to come in as the COVID-19 Health Act enjoins us to get from the levy. The point is that there's COVID anyway, but what we are calling for is that the seed money for the Public Health Emergency Fund should come from the COVID-19 Health Levy. And then once that is there, of course, we'll look at other ways to get it sustained. As I said, Ghanaians are altruistic. We also did some study looking at people's willingness to pay to actually even contribute to vaccine in Ghana during the COVID era. We did what's called altruistic willingness to pay. That clearly showed that, yes, people are interested in contributing to a fund if and only if they are sure of what it's going to be used for. And so that is what we are calling for. There are two things. One, government should change the COVID-19 Trust Fund into a public health emergency fund, and also channel resources from the COVID-19 levy as a seed money for the fund. That is what we are looking at. We are also suggesting that, when COVID hit, everything was at the national level. The district were looking up to the national level to help in the COVID response. So another thing we are looking at is possibly the District Assembly Common Fund, although there are challenges with it, but if the administrator can set up some percentage solely for supporting public health emergencies at the district level, that would also help. But all this one will still contribute to the fund that we are calling for. The good thing is that we have a World Health Organization and other international bodies who are also willing and ready to support various countries, but they have to see commitment. That is what is called counterpart funding. Ghana, we've not performed that well in what's called the joint external evaluations. And so WHO and the like are looking at ways to support various countries. So there is support, but they need to see the country commitment. And so establishing such a fund is going to really help us to leverage on to get, of course, other external inflows as well. But we think that we need to first of all look inward, look within first, and then...
All right, Doc, let me ask you this. GET Fund, Heritage Fund, there isn't a single fund ever created by the government of Ghana that has been used solely for its purpose. It always ends up getting diverted for some other reason, including the COVID-19 Trust Fund. So what is it that makes Send Ghana confident that a fund created to manage epidemics will in any way help manage epidemics and not end up being used for something else, especially by a cash-strapped government such as we have today?
Koyo, you are right on that. I mean, citing the examples of the National Health Insurance and then the GET Fund. But you also agree with me that, irrespective of the fact that sometimes there are diversions, definitely the very first thing they will look at is to allocate some for as education infrastructure, allocate some to the National Health Insurance Authority to make sure that they work. So, I mean, that is given. So I think, and some we think that is a necessary condition to even help in terms of implementing public health emergency-related diseases. The fact is that if you do not have such a fund, then you cannot point to one particular source that you can get it. But what we are even calling for is, of course, based on what you said, and that is the fact, is that in as much as we are calling for the fund to be established, we want it to be in such a way that nobody can just decide to come and then use the fund for whichever purpose that they think they have to use it. So we are even looking at, in terms of the management, who manages the fund and the like. So these are discussions that hopefully we will be engaging with stakeholders to kind of look at it and then see what can be done. But for us, the first necessary condition is that the fund needs to be established where we can really go there. That is the very first source. And then when that is done, we'll of course implore on government about the need to use the fund solely for the intended purpose.
Away from that, the Minister of Trade and Industry, Kojo Alan Chumanting, has commissioned the Savelugu Rice Processing Factory. Now, the rice factory, which is under the One District, One Factory Common Use Facility, is a farmer-owned agro-industrial processing facility established with seed funding from the Ministry of Trade and Industry under the Rural Enterprise Program. The Savelugu Rice Processing Factory, which has the state-of-the-art processing equipment, has the capacity to produce between 1.5 and 28 ton processed rice per hour. The minister also commissioned Savelugu Technology Solution Center.
The Savelugu Rice Processing Factory, which was started in January 2020, was completed in July 2021. The rice factory is one of 5 built across the country. Speaking at a ceremony to commission the factory, the Minister for Trade and Industry, Alan Chumanting, said the factory will open up more business opportunities in the area.
This commissioning will also enhance industrial production in this community. Because from processing of rice, you can produce so many other products. Some for the poultry industry, you can even produce beer and alcohol and other beverages from the processing of rice. Number 5, this is a perfect example of community ownership of business, because this factory is owned by almost 730 farmers. 70% is owned by 730 farmers.
The Northern Regional Minister, Shani Alhassan Shaibu, said the commissioning of the 2 projects will be a catalyst to bring development to the people of the Northern region.
Commissioning of these 2 great projects will be a catalyst to bring development to the people of the Northern region, and for that matter, to be very specific, the Savulugu municipality. Quite significantly, the facilities of direct relationship with agriculture, which is the mainstay of the region.
The Executive Director of Rural Enterprise Project, Isi Atta, on his part said the strategic position of Savulugu made it possible for the Ministry of Trade and Industry to establish these factories.
That it is very, very rare for one district to benefit from both the common research facility and the technology solutions center as we have witnessed here. Of course, due to strategic position of the Savulugu Municipal Assembly and the Ministry of Trade and Industry's direction in the industrialization policy agenda, the municipality boasts of these 2 facilities, which are incidentally located side by side.
The Ghana Tertiary Education Commission has justified the decision to restrict admissions into the colleges of education for the 2023 academic year. Now, the Commission threatened to withhold feeding grants and teacher trainee allowances to colleges of education if they admit students beyond the quota set for them. Executive Director of Africa Education Watch, Kofi Asari, says the government is evading the real challenges the colleges have to contend with. He wants the government to channel money for allowances into addressing these challenges, including infrastructure. Vice Principal for Bagabaga Colleges of Education, Emmanuel Al-Hassan, tells JoyNews about the massive infrastructural deficits in his school and many colleges of education.
Actually, the project was supposed to have been completed in 2012. And that would have boosted the enrollment of females in the college. But because of this situation, we are forced to limit the number of ladies that we can admit. And this is something that we have strived to solve, but it is not something that is easy. It's a worry to us, and we have gone every length and breadth to see how the contractor would come back to site. All certificates that he has prepared and submitted to get fund for payment, I think they have been honored. But we are not seeing any progress of work on it. As we speak, some of the materials that were used here, like the cables, because they have abandoned it, second owners, or if I call them thieves, have come to pull them out. And obviously it's going to increase the cost of the project if he comes back anytime. But the place has become a den for, miscreants. We smokers invade the place, and you can see a lot of things that some of these miscreants have dropped. If you go into some of the rooms, you can see condoms and other things, wrappers of tramadol, and then matches and other things which they have used to enjoy themselves. And these are all signs that, and occasionally we come to see people sitting there and actually engage in other things that are not appropriate.
JoyNews checks in many of the colleges of education reveal a similar situation. But whilst rejecting the description of the directive of a reintroduction of the quota system, GTech says it is simply a rational and pragmatic decision.
at the number of teachers that we need to produce for the campus. So it's also from a quality perspective. We want to make sure that the classrooms are not overcrowded and that students are being given quality teaching. In the past, when reference was made to some quota system, I'm sure you may have had access to what Professor Yanka, who was Minister of State at the time, said. He said we do not operate with a quota system. The only constraint to the numbers at that time was the physical space for having the students on campus, classroom, hostels, and the like. And then also being mindful of the quality. So it's still the same thing. So there hasn't been quality. When I hear people say reintroduction of quota system, it seems to be suggestive of certain fixed mindset that prevailed at a certain point, which is being reached. No, we're just being rational and pragmatic with physical space as how many can be.
You're still watching Joy News Desk with me, Mapitso Sebidi. We're going to take a quick breather. We'll be back with more. You're welcome back. Well, how well do you know a Supreme Court justice? Well, let's introduce you to Justice Henrietta Joy Mensah-Bonsu, who has been speaking exclusively to Mama V Owusu Abwaje.
My mother was particular about keeping your surroundings clean and running a home. And, so I grew up in a home. And so some of the things were part of what you learned growing up in a home. Now, this C that I got in PE, what it did was to tilt. You see, when your report came in, my father would take it and the couple would discuss. Between the two of them, you could never set one against the other. They were always on the same page on everything. So they must have discussed what to tell me. And so my father took the report, counted how many A's and B's I had versus how many C's. And my mother said, "You are not an average student. But this report is telling us you are an average student, and we cannot accept that." And my father said, "You even made a C in PE." And I said, "You see, but for that C, the balance would not have tilted." And they were not impressed. And so they went through the report with me. And my father discovered that I had joined a lot of societies because in Wesley Girls Forms 1 to 3, you couldn't join any society. But in Form 4, you could join any society. And I had joined so many that, according to him, I attended a society meeting every day and even Sundays and extras. And I said, "No, that's not how it works." He says, "Well, that's the story the report tells us." And so you have to choose. You can choose any two, but you shouldn't have to commit to more than 2 societies and society meetings every week. It means you are not spending enough time studying. And that's what I did. So that is the story of the PE. I was always as much of a sportswoman as I could manage. I represented Wesley Girls at Interco throwing the shot put.
Yeah, you're an expert in that.
Shot put was my event, and now I have a sore shoulder for it.
Oh.
And then I played hockey.
You were captain of the hockey team?
Which my father also played in school.
Right.
The initial Ghana hockey team, he was on it with Mr. Kenamwa.
Right.
The late Mr. Kenamwa of GBC,
right.
yes. So my father was very sporty in that way. My mother, no.
I'm asking this because a lot of the young ones. Well, we're all guilty of it. We're on social media a lot. But you did a bit of everything and still you were excellent. How do you balance it today with social media?
In our day, there was no social media. So maybe we are talking of different eras, and but I was interested in those things, and when I wasn't interested, I didn't put in much effort. So I suppose my interest had something to do with it. And my mother was always insistent that she was bringing up an African woman, and I had to be an African woman. So housework, cleaning, scrubbing, my goodness, and all of that was part of my upbringing. So I can't claim any credit really for getting things just right. I was just lucky. I keep saying that for me, I don't call it luck. I call it the grace of God. And I've enjoyed plenty of it. God has been there for me at every point when something could have gone wrong. So I feel a bit of a fake claiming credit for something over which I had no control. Somebody was out there looking out for me, that's all.
Right. Let's talk about your first national assignments outside this country, even though you came back to also be on the National Reconciliation Commission as a member.
Let me tell you that my first national assignment was not what you think, but as a member of the legal committee of the National Commission on Children.
Right.
I represented Ghana on the Intergovernmental Committee of Experts on the Declaration of Welfare, the Rights and Welfare of the African Child.
Right.
So that was when I stood out as a Ghanaian to represent the interests of Ghana and the Ghanaian child. And that committee, that legal committee did a lot. We initiated the conversations on child abuse and child labor and all of those things in the early 90s, and interacted with the new district assemblies to draw their attention to the plight of children in their district assemblies. And I'm sure it's no surprise to you that Ghana was the first to ratify the rights of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We had a lot to do with that.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So that was the first assignment, really, on behalf of the children of Ghana. Yes.
Right. Well, thanks to you, we've come a long way. But the assignment that I thought was the first national assignment, I guess, was widely reported also. Maybe that's why we skipped the very first national assignment. But you also went on to be on the National Reconciliation Committee. In fact, you were the youngest member then to be on the commission.
They nicknamed me Baby Commissioner.
How did you do it, really? You're a professor at the age of 45. You were on all these important commissions and committees. How do you think that happened for you?
What happened was when I was tapped for it, I was a little nervous. Incidentally, the president now was the Attorney General who called me to a sudden meeting, and I had just come home from representing Ghana on the Lockerbie, the OAU committee on Lockerbie. So I thought that was what the Attorney General wanted to report to Cabinet about, because he said he needed to see me. He was going to Cabinet. So I thought he was going to report on Ghana's position on Lockerbie. So I took all the extra reports, thinking that maybe what I submitted through the ministry hadn't reached him. And I got there and he said, the president says to tell you that you should serve on this committee. I said, no, I'm too young. And he said, well, President Kufuor thinks the young people of Ghana also need to be represented. Because I thought it was for very senior people. So that's how I got on. And that told me that the nature of it was going to be difficult to combine with anything. So I took a sabbatical. I was due for a sabbatical anyway, but had not planned to take it. But when that happened, then I applied formally to take a sabbatical. So I was on sabbatical leave for the period.
Right.
But I had to teach because we were short-staffed. So I did extra teaching just to keep things going at the faculty. But I was on sabbatical leave officially.
Right. One of the important committees, I guess, would be the education review, of which you're a member of. And I can't help but ask, because of the work that you did, the quality of education today, particularly in the tertiary education level, is that what the plan was? Is that what you envisaged?
This is the Anamoa Committee, Anamoa Mensa Committee. And you see, some things steal up on you if you don't take care. So suddenly there was an explosion and everybody wanted tertiary education, which is good because in the past, the international organizations we dealt with thought that people should have primary education. And I remember personalities like Dr. Okonjo-Iweala saying that she had got to where she had got to not because of primary education, but because of tertiary education. So the need to switch around our focus so that people could have tertiary education became preeminent. The problem with the educational system is that it's a social good. So some things can steal up on you. We used to have what they called, I forget what the name is now, it was the Ministry of Finance, but it was like they tried to match our human resource needs. Those days they called it manpower something. But I think at some point we abandoned it. Unfortunately, I think although we had adopted, I was a member of committees on campus, we had adopted 40–60% in favor of science because we were producing too many arts graduates. But when there was an explosion in the tertiary sector, I think too many of the private institutions went in the direction of the general arts system, which is not as expensive as science. And so I believe that's been part of the difficulties we've had, that we have so many people with qualifications in the arts, and there's a dearth of science-based disciplines.
Right.
But I think we'll get it right as we go on. So you wanted to know what I think of it. I think every generation produces what it is capable of producing. Our students are still doing very well when they go abroad to other universities in the same way as in my generation. So who am I to say that their quality is lower?
Right.
It may be different, but it may be dictated by the needs of the time. Now they have all these social media outlets to help. They have all these computers. In our day, we literally slept in the law library. In their day, they have most of the materials they need on their laptops. The difference is that we went to the library to read because there was no other option. They think they have the material on their laptops, so they know it. And I have been constantly cajoling them that having it in your room is not equivalent to having it in your head. So I think making the jump between having it ready on hand and reading it has been a challenge for some.
Right. Are you surprised that we have all these numbers wanting to read law?
No, not surprised. You see, all these bright young people, mostly young men, appearing on TV and throwing around theories. It's bound to make law look fascinating. It has always been, I must say, but now it's even more fascinating. In our parents' generation, and I suppose in mine, many people read law while working so that when they retired from the public service, they could have careers in law. But I think the young people now, their aims may be different. But I suspect that seeing all these jazzy looking young people throwing around big words and big ideas and so on has to have some attraction for young people. So maybe that's the reason.
How was it in your, well, maybe your time and years after? Because recently, when over 800 students were called to the bar, young lawyers were called to the bar, it made a huge buzz. People were posting lawyers and people were looking for lawyers who had graduated to post. How were you celebrating it in your days?
In our day,
called to the bar,
life was very different. I think in my class, we may have been maybe a little over 60 called to the bar. We had had a disturbed year, going to carry cocoa and all of that. I'm not complaining because I was able to have my second child in peace. So we were called to the bar in December. And in those days, the call was held in the Chief Justice's court, which is a much smaller court than the Supreme Court. I think it was remodeled and expanded and so on. But in those days, the call was in the court, in the courtroom, and it was a small event. You took it, you celebrated. I remember cooking for a few people. I loved to cook. These days, I don't cook anymore. But cooking was my hobby, really. And I took cookery for O-level. So I remember having a little dinner party for my friends and family who had come. But those days, it wasn't a big deal. Those days, it wasn't a big deal.
Right.
Viosi Aboje's interview with Henry Yeta. Now, a year ago, we lost our beloved boss, and yesterday we gathered at his house to celebrate his life. Here is a report of everything that happened yesterday.
He is Lord. He has risen from the dead. He is Lord. Every knee shall bow, every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is.
Songs of praise and thanksgiving as family and friends gather to celebrate the life of Elvis Kukukwashi, former general manager of Joy Brands, who joined his maker exactly a year ago.
Jesus Christ is all your right, all your right, all your right. What's so fearful, all your right. Koto jeni na bekutu, teche mabe pemaka, seji.
The family will remember him for his unique character and attitude.
Sometimes, perhaps today, God will say to you, this night your soul shall be required of you. So prepare to meet your God, O friends. So when Elvis started working, his character and attitude was so unique. We as a family, we are still mourning Elvis. Tears are still falling down our eyes. And I cannot say that this will stop tomorrow or the day after. But we are still believing and trusting God that he whom we believe in will surely see us through. Everyone in the family is crying for Elvis because he has done so much for us. When you are down, Elvis will lift you up. When you have nothing, Elvis will empty his pocket just because of you. We have come to realize that he has played a very great role in our lives. We work together as a big family. In our home, you will not know who is who because we all blend into each other. That was the life we were taught from the beginning. I just want to say that Elvis, you have done so good for this family, so well for your children, so well for everyone in this family. Forever we shall remember you.
Host of the Super Morning Show, Kojo Youngson, spoke on behalf of the multimedia group.
I can't think of any industry or sector that employs more independent, stubborn minds than a newsroom. And the Joy newsroom is perhaps the best example of this. It does not take ordinary humans to run the Joy newsroom. To run it successfully, you need to be not just extraordinary, but you need to be extraordinarily blessed. And God gave us exactly that person in Elvis Kwashi. I think it's important that as part of our culture, we recognize the lives of the departed 1 year after they leave us, because 1 year is a very suitable period of time to measure the difference in your life since your loved one departed. I have no doubt that just as my colleagues and I are measuring the millions of ways in which life has been split into two, time with Elvis and time after Elvis, I'm sure his beloved wife Cynthia and children, I'm sure his fraternity in the church, and all the people in the different spheres whose lives he has not just touched but elevated, are all measuring what 1 year without Elvis really means. And that's what I would like to invite us all to do in the next quiet moments. Just measure that 1 year. The beauty of it is that Elvis was a gift that kept on giving. And even after his departure, we still continue to benefit from his amazing legacy.
A true leader is one that leads from behind and passes on his skills to his team. And that's exactly what Elvis did for the Church of Pentecost English Assembly, Mataiko.
Elvis has been a great asset to us. He's been a blessing and has done a lot to impart the church. He was one person that we all looked up to. He had an enviable character which all of us loved to emulate. He was a great person amongst us. He led the church as a great leader. When the English Assembly was formed, he had the mandate to groom leaders, and he had 45 people to do that. And by the time he left, he had 200 members, and he had groomed many to become ministers and serving in different capacities in the church. Next year will be 10 years when the English Assembly was formed. And we owe a lot of the formative years of English Assembly to Elvis and the structures that we see to his leadership. Elvis was caring, he was loving, he showed no partiality to anyone in the church. He always ensured that he calls first when he hears of any member in a challenge. And he makes sure that every support that a member needed, that person had that. However, we will be able to get that member to get out of that challenge. We will ensure that we do that.
We continue to celebrate the real daddy, the real friend, the real boss. Continue to fly high in the skies with the stars, Elvis, until we meet again. We continue to celebrate our real boss. May you rest in eternal power. Now, take a moment, think of your favorite meal, that goat meat soup, chicken stew, and pork kebab. And if you have a sweet tooth, the chocolate and red velvet cake. Now imagine not being able to taste any of the savory and sweet bombs. That is the daily struggles of Vincent Atubra, who suffers from esophageal stricture, and thus he can only eat and drink through a tube. His life hangs in a balance, and JoyNews' Samuel Kojo Brace has the rest of the story.
I supum nanam pubayamam. Mabakribiaman trimpo. Munpa onko. Anande mende syringe marching. Namdampano on the affair. Supini.
How ne de wife a bebre on podin yanko ponadum masisi or down with one. Ono oka kitty nanka we.
The doctor and BBR no chatter or there pass the way no where them operation no be here $3,000. Which is $3,000. Now on be 2 years new.
Vincent Atobra, a 25-year-old, looking half his age. He has been feeding himself through a strange means, the use of a specialized syringe. He's done this for the past 3 years.
Me true today, me men it benibia in su fufu banku me ada or yellow today tina kukum dikote actually the fat tupini in the fat tupini moto cocoa tea or nina on one of the fat.
He has been feeding like this because he suffers from what is called corrosive esophageal stricture. Thirsty for water, he accidentally drank what looked like water but turned out to be caustic soda.
Namko school, Timfi school bear no na is commanding and catch him and there. Catch him and the names commanding, no catch him there, uncover and denim, nan Swiss when I'm Miss Sebino. Tea, uncover and them, I'm Sebino. Na, I didn't shame, memory. To a shimmy them na, me team. Team one now, or bear. No be some there, Abasamna, with Namkadins, coming them. In Ambessa and no me. Sudana, Menumi.
And take over, not the owner, Kada cover, and not ye won't sue Sihona, soda, so sin chen. But they who difference in
David. And sooner a Sudano or a pepe, unicala.
After he drank the caustic soda, he recovered after receiving treatment, but his throat constricted again 3 years ago.
One more call hospital. One more call hospital now. I can no the friend offering you quit. No one more call. One more call no. Bibia to 2 years ma. Nam to me did him to me a bibia. Nti e children as I saw. The Albanese said, "I shall see beam."
Vincent says all efforts to get this rectified have yielded little result. His quality of life has reduced greatly. Vincent hungers to once again eat through his mouth, just like everybody. For now, even drinking water is impossible for him.
Bia, I suppum na nampubeya mam. No bakribia men trying po. Po onko. Anande mende syringe marching. Nam dampano de afa. Tupini. Mimicha. Ni tup na kasa mwade. Miunde mimia emiefuno. Hamba so. Tup na noche. Some me dina. Ndid bankuma onko. Bundu wejina. Which means there. My fool.
Vincent is an orphan living with a grandmother. His aunt, Tewia, tells me, but for the grace of God, he would have lost his life long ago.
Nana na otenencheno, ontuminye ejuma papa biala. Cedri na walekano, wetu ho anomane biala. Nana no ontumonko. The Odenboko, Kurubuna, Wako Akayan Cedri, Sikasam no so, Wyadzen. A how ne day wife for be brave on pudding yanko ponadum, my sister, or down with one. On no oka kitty nanka we. Or sola nemin muno, untumi menade. Untumi didi, untumi yashi, honor de bia a blanco tinti, tide, it depend be out for 2 punum. And I wait to me didi.
For the past 3 years, one man has been of constant support to him. Eric Oko Hackman. He's been trying to rally support to help Vincent. Vincent's condition depresses him.
To doctor ni bibia no chara order and pass the way no where them operation no be here $3,000. Which is $3,000. Now ono be 2 years new. Nti by this time the obobo last time the obobo nti okoba no no chede na nkasa no amani paper de onfonko korubu ho ma paper no ma ode kwano was paper na spy nti ode osana obebe ye eni bi o se dem scanner sabe no obebe twa bi o.
And that's how we end Joy News Desk here on the Joy News channel. For more news, you can log on to myjoyonline.com. I am Mapitso Sebidi.